guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Kayla, and I was like, what should I film? I'm trying to be a little better about actually filming things and trying to get stuff up on a semi-regular weekly-ish schedule. Don't know what day of the week that's gonna be. That's all over the place, but whatever. I've seen some people do like my favorite books of the year so far, and I was like, that's really fun because it's interesting to see like, have I found the book that is going to be my favorite at the end of the year already, or like, is that waiting for me? And I have a lot of books that I'm really excited to read once we get into like spooky season and stuff that I feel like could be 5 stars, and I didn't want to lose these 5 stars like in the shuffle of all that when I'm making end of year lists and everything. So I was like, that's a great idea. I'm going to talk about, I think I've got about like 8 to 10 favorite books. They're, I think, all 5 stars, but maybe one 4.5. Yeah, so I'm just gonna, it's not gonna be in any real order, just kind of the order I think of things, maybe a little bit in like reading order, except for my number 1, which I'll do last, but I also talked about that in my mid-year wrap-up, so it's not like as exciting. Okay, so first up, I'm going to talk technically about 2 books, but I'm just calling it 1 book, and that is the Six of Crows duology by Leigh Bardugo. This is like a really good floppy paperback, and this one's like a little stiffer, but I guess it's bigger. But anyway, I gave them both 5 stars. This one is my favorite of the 2, but they are like a package deal. I love them. One of my favorite series duologies of all time. If you don't know what Six of Crows is about, I feel like you really must not be in any sort of fantasy side of BookTube. Basically, it's one of the Grishaverse books, which is just like this world where like some people have magic powers. It's not super important in this duology itself, but this duology is a heist story. It's basically just these 6 characters come together and create like a heist team, Ocean's 11 style, and have to steal something, and it's so great. And the second book is like crazy, and it's just about like found family and all of that. The characters are just amazing. There's so much like disability representation. There's like 2 bisexual characters and a gay character. There's like actual like people of color, whereas in like the original like Shadow and Bone series, like everybody's like white. So yeah, it's so good. It's so funny. I love all of them. Like, I couldn't even pick a favorite crow. They're all amazing. This book made me cry so much just because like I loved them. And then this book made me cry for like actually sad things were happening, but I cannot recommend it enough. It's gonna be a thing that I like reread at points, and I'm not a big rereader because I just feel like it will be a different experience like on a reread when you know what's coming. Let's stick with Leigh Bardugo and talk about Hellbent, which is the sequel to Ninth House that I absolutely loved. I gave this a 5 star, I gave Ninth House 5 star. I think I like, on my first read, I will be probably doing a reread before like the next book comes out, whenever that is. I liked Ninth House a little bit more just because I love kind of like an introduction to the world, and that was really fun. But I think that on a reread, I will actually like this one more, because I think part of what I didn't love as much as Ninth House was that like I didn't know where it was going. Like, but like now that I know why all the things that I felt like were like not the plot, that they were the plot, that they like, it seemed like there were a lot of side stories that like I didn't see how they were going to impact the actual like storyline that was like important, but they like ended up doing that. So like on a reread, I'll like appreciate them more. But yeah, Ninth House is the story of this girl, Alex Stern, who gets accepted into Yale with the condition that she is a member of the secret society Leith. or something like that. I forget how to pronounce it. I looked it up back in January, but that's gone from my brain. And they basically, their job is kind of to watch over the other secret societies at Yale, which are all doing like magic and like necromancy, and like their job is to kind of make sure they don't like, I don't know, like do messed up stuff and like kill people, and like especially like kill like random people who live in New Haven, you know? And so it's just kind of about that. She can see ghosts. She has like a mentor who's kind of hot or whatever. But it's a really good like dark academia fantasy story, and the sequel was amazing, and I cannot wait for more. I'm going to mention a book that I don't have a physical copy of, and that is Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie, which I really think is my favorite Poirot, which I know is a cliche, but it is so iconic for a reason. It's, if you haven't seen any of the movies or know about it or whatever, I managed to stay completely unspoiled for what I'm looking back and I'm like, I feel like that might be like an iconic twist that like a lot of people are spoiled for. But it's basically, it is what it says. Poirot is on the Orient Express coming back from Turkey, I think, and they get like stuck in a snowstorm. There's a murder, and he has to figure out who did it before like they're in like Hungary or something like that, before like the Hungarian police can like get out to them. He wants to solve it. And it's basically this like small cast of characters that are in this specific like train car where the murder happened, because it happened at a time that like nobody was able to get in and out or whatever. And it's all done in like interviews, and it's just like told so well, and like all the characters are so interesting. Like Agatha Christie has like these tropes, like these character archetypes that she's a big fan of, but I feel like in this one it was like the best versions of all of them, and I really thought it was really interesting. I was completely blown away by the twist, but also like as soon as the reveal happened, I was like, of course, that's the only thing that made sense. So I cannot recommend it enough. I don't know if I would recommend it as like a starting place for Poirot, honestly, because I don't know if it's like, if there's anything better. So I would maybe start with some like mediocre ones. I think the first Poirot is a great place to start, the Mysterious Affair Styles or whatever it's called. Yeah, so love it. Murder on the Orient Express, one of my favorite books of the year. A recent one that I talked about in my like June wrap up, just like my last video or whatever, is Chlorine by Jade Song. Loved it. It is the story of involves this girl through like her childhood and adolescence and everything, and she wants to be a mermaid, is really how it's described. But it is about so much more than that. It's about girlhood and queerness and the patriarchy and competitive swimming and just all of that. I think it's like required reading for anyone who is interested in girlhood, either because they experienced it themselves or they're just trying to understand that really weird experience. Like if you saw the Barbie movie and you were like, that's interesting, but like what if it was body horror mermaid fantasy commentary on being a woman? Chlorine, it's for you. Definitely check trigger warnings. There's a lot, and I would say that none, I know there's like this occasional like discourse about like, our trigger warnings spoilery? I would say that like nothing that you would be like warned for trigger wise in this book is remotely plot spoilery. So like look them up, please protect yourself, like it's intense. Okay, next I'm gonna mention a classic, which is my favorite classic I've read this year, and I've only read like 2 or 3, but still, is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. That is the story of a girl who we don't know her name, she's a young woman who she meets this guy on vacation. I feel like I'm describing like a weird Emily Henry novel, like when I'm like, she meets this guy on vacation, but no, she meets this man on vacation while she is traveling with like her caretaker, because she's like an orphan or whatever, and like falls in love with him, and they end up getting married. He's like a recent widower, and they go back to his house, Manderley, in the UK, and it's just a very kind of creepy experience. It's like a gothic kind of novel. There's elements of like a haunting almost, but I feel like it's much more of like a psychological haunting. She is very like, she feels very out of place in this way that is very 20-something and so relatable, even though it is about like so much like bigger things than all of that. Like she feels like she can't live up to Rebecca. Like that's why it's called Rebecca, because so much of the novel like revolves around like this ideal woman, Rebecca, and like about finding out like the truth about who Rebecca was and all of that. And it goes in like directions that I didn't expect, and it feels like, I think a lot of classics can be really overwhelming because you just feel like the way they talk and the way everything happens and the way the writing was, it just feels like inaccessible. Like it's not relatable. You're not gonna be able to like see yourself in the characters or anything, but because it's from the 20s, I think the writing style is a bit more easily digestible. And the main character, as much as sometimes I'm like, you're annoying, we were all annoying when we were 21 or whatever, so she's very relatable. A surprise fave was A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J Maas, which I skipped the first one, A Court of Thorns and Roses. I feel like I will go back and read it at some point. So I can't really tell you what happens in A Court of Mist and Fury, but A Court of Thorns and Roses is about this girl, Feyre, young woman. I don't really know how old she is. I just ignore the ages in fantasy novels because these people are so often like 17 doing things that like I would have been scared to do at 25. But so in my head she's like 25. And she like, in the first book she's like the only person in her family who can like provide for them because like their dad sucks and her sisters are useless. So she like kills a wolf, but the wolf is like a fairy. And so then she's like, you have to come to the fairy spring court and like be our hostage as punishment, payment for what you did. I don't know, this whole thing. She falls in love with the king of the spring court, Tamlin, and all that, whatever. I don't know. I watched Carrie Can Read. I watched her summary. I didn't read the book. But the second book is just so much about everything that happens in the first book is very traumatizing. So the second book is a lot about like grief and PTSD, honestly, and you spend more time with like a different group of characters that I loved. And I just really read it at a time where I just needed someone who was going through a lot of shit and like overcoming it. Like, you know, like I was going through like a really difficult time and I was like, me and Feyre, like we understand each other. Like, so I really connected to that, and I thought the exploration of grief and her refinding who she is and her power was just really affecting and really well done. And like the romance is great and everything, but I was very much there for like the character journeys, and I loved that. And I think that's what books are made for. Like we can argue all day about like the quality of Sarah J Maas in whatever way, but if the books like connect to people and help people, like that's what reading's supposed to do. So that's one of my favorite books of the year. Then kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, a book that if you try and argue with me about whether it was well written or not, I'll like fight you, is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Kweke Emeze, another great book that I read in June for Pride Month, and tells the story of Faye, I believe is how you pronounce her name. Saying Feyre and then Faye like right back, like back to back was like my mouth and brain were like, what? But yeah, she's about 30 and she is a like widow already. Her like husband died in a horrible car accident like 4 or 5 years ago, and she's still like kind of dealing with the trauma of all that, just kind of starting to date again. And this guy that she's kind of friends with, kind of maybe something else, they go back to like his family home on like the islands in the Caribbean, and she meets his father, and there's like sparks with his dad, and that's like, oh no. And the book is just, it's really all about like grief and how important it is to like find people who understand you and just find yourself. It's kind of honestly like the same sort of message as A Court of Mist and Fury, like about like trauma and grief and like working through it and like realizing that you are infinitely powerful and that you can experience like joy and that no one can like take that from you, that you are like in charge yourself. And like maybe there's a little bit of messiness around all of that, but that it's just important to like remember who you are, you know, and not let the stuff you've been through like ruin you forever. And Akwaeke Emezi, they are just unbelievable as a writer. Like their way with words is like out of this world. So I cannot recommend that book enough, and I feel like it's gonna be one of my favorites of the year when I get to the end of the year. Like I'm not worried about that. The last book that I don't own a physical copy of, but I actually might end up buying one, is I just read it. It will be in my like July wrap up. So this is like a sneak peek. They Can't Kill Us Until They Kill Us by Hanif Abdurraqib. I hope I pronounced that right. Listen to him say it a lot. But this is a collection of his essays, I think most of which have been published before, but not all of them. He was a journalist, but specifically like a music journalist. He worked at like MTV News for a while and everything. And he is like a Black man, so he writes a lot about like the experience of like being a Black man at punk shows, or like the feeling of music and joy after the killing of Michael Brown and stuff like that. Like the way he's able to like use music or pop culture references to like discuss really deep topics was incredibly moving to me, as I am someone who like music is my life. Music is everything to me. One of my favorite essays was about Fall Out Boy and his friend who he got into Fall Out Boys with, suicide, and like all of that was just like beautifully written. Fall Out Boy is like one of my absolute favorite bands of all time. I have a Fall Out Boy tattoo, and I loved he starts and ends it with an essay about like Carly Rae Jepsen, and those were amazing. I just honestly like cried so much reading the book. There's a lot about his family. There's a lot about just like political things going on in America. There was one essay about like Black joy that just like, I don't know, just made me like sob. I cannot recommend it enough. It's tough at times. Like, as I just said, there's an essay about suicide, but I definitely think that it is worth reading. He narrates the audiobook, and I loved the way he read his own things. Obviously, some of them are a lot more like poetic. He's a poet originally, and some are more journalist-like, and absolutely amazing. And then my final one is going to be a book I've talked about a bunch. Probably, I cannot imagine this not being my favorite book of the year, and that is Our Wives Under the Sea by Julia Armfield, which I read in like February, when I was dealing with the fact that my cat was going to be dying soon. And this is a book about grief and about loss and about watching someone you love slip away and knowing where it's going but not wanting to admit where it's going, and the holding on and the letting go. And then there's like horror elements of like, because it's a story of these two women who one of the wives, our wives under the sea, like stays on land, and the other one is like in a submarine, and they get stuck like under the ocean, under the sea for like 6 months, and it's like this horrific thing. And like you following the wife under the sea in the time when they're there, and then also like after they get back, the other wife and her experience, like when her wife comes back, like changed and different and all of that. And it is so heartbreakingly beautifully written. I want to read it again and annotate it, but I also am like, I don't want to cry that hard ever again in my entire life. But it is so amazing. Yeah, it says Leah is changed, a marine biologist. She left for a routine expedition months earlier, only this time her submarine sank to the seafloor. When she finally surfaces and returns home, her wife, Mary, knows that something is wrong. So that's what it is. It definitely, I think a lot of people thought it was going to be more horror than it is, and it's just some light body horror and some sci-fi kind of stuff, and just then under the sea there's some like creepiness, but I would never say that it like crosses the line into like horror. It's really, it's literary fiction. It's just about like grief and love, and I think if you go into it knowing that that's what it's going to be, and like that it's a character study, and that some people think the ending is open-ended for some reason. I have no idea why. It is not. But yeah, if you go into it knowing what it is and not expecting like a sci-fi horror novel, if you don't love it, I'll eat this book. I won't do that. I won't. But yeah, that is gonna be my favorite book of the year. I know it. It might be wrong, but right now it feels true. So thank you so much for watching. This was really fun to like reminisce and look back at like my different 5 stars and remember what I loved in January versus what I love like now in July. Like finding, I feel like I found like a book I love in almost every month of the year, except when I was like really slumpy, but in like May. But yeah, so this was fun, and I'm interested to see how my list is different at the end of the year. And if you've read any of these books, let me know, and let me know what some of your favorite books of the year are. And yeah. Thank you so much. Bye.